Hello, and welcome to the final session of the 2021 State of Medical Device Virtual Summit. So this session is on a very popular topic in medical device world right now, which is MDR, and it is titled A Delay in MDR, Where Are We Now? My name is Karen Schuyler. I'm a solutions engineer here at Greenlight Guru, and I will be your moderator for this session. Before I introduce our speaker, Thor Rollins, he's from Nelson Laboratories, here are a few logistics. First, this session is about 45 minutes long and includes a Q&A session at the end. Please submit your questions throughout the presentation in the box on the right-hand side, and we'll get to as many of them as time permits. Like the other sessions you've seen, this entire session will be recorded and slides will be available for you to download on the Summit website after the presentation. I'd also like to share a few words about Greenlight Guru and why we put on this free virtual summit. So here at Greenlight Guru, our mission is to improve the quality of life. As an organization, we strive to help you bring safer, life-changing devices to market faster and with less risk. Ultimately, we want to help companies be successful, whether that's through hosting free informational sessions or through our award-winning medical device QMS software. If you'd like to learn more about our QMS software and why medical device companies around the world are moving away from paper-based general purpose QMS and adopting our medical device specific QMS software, please head over to www.greenlight.guru after today's presentation. And we have a lot of very awesome people who would love to talk to you about a personalized one-on-one demo. So now on to today's presentation. I'm really excited to introduce Thor Rollins. Thor is a certified microbiologist and specializes in the selection and conduct of in vitro and in vivo biocompatibility tests. He actively speaks on biocompatibility related topics through Nelson Labs external seminars, webinars, and trade shows. He presented on biocompatibility at the American College of Toxicology annual meeting in 2013 and has many published articles on biocompatibility topics. So he's a participating member on all AAMI TC 194 and 10993 ISO committees and plays an active role along with the FDA and regulatory committees developing standards, discussing biocompatibility methods, and voting on changes to those standards. As one of a select group of experts in the industry, Thor's participation on the committees offers him insight on industry changes and helps prepare clients for changes in testing. So we can definitely stand to learn a lot from his expertise. So with that, I will hand the presentation over to Thor.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me. It's been a very interesting year. Usually we do similar types of presentations like today live so that I get to see everybody's smiling faces. Hopefully they're smiling and get to know you guys a little bit better. But hopefully sometime soon we'll be able to do that. But I am thankful for technology and for companies like Greenlight who take some time to put together these types of informational seminars so that we can still kind of spread the knowledge, try to get out what we're seeing in the industry to try to stay on top of things while we're all sequestered in our basements at home. So today we are going to be talking a lot about the MDR, the medical device registrations that will be coming live here in May of 2021. Now, I don't know how much knowledge that each individual has on this presentation. So I'm going to start with a little bit of a background. It might be repetitive for some of you, but we'll get into kind of where we stand today here in a second. But for those of you that may have less familiarity with the MDR, basically what it comes down to is in Europe, there was some concerns about the safety of medical devices. There were some specifics and some general issues with medical devices, with some recalls, some companies doing some things that they shouldn't be doing and being caught and impacting patient safety. And there was a lot of political pressure in the European Union to try to fix that and to make sure medical devices had the confidence that the general public had confidence in their medical devices again. So with that, they drastically overhauled their regulatory system, that the laws that the notified bodies enforce. And that's what the MDRs are, the medical device regulations. Before they were the MDD, medical device directives. So this new regulations were quite different. There's a lot of differences. We'll get into some of those here in a minute. and that was supposed to roll out in May of 2020. Well, because of the COVID impact, the European Union got together and decided to postpone that 1 year. So now they'll be active in May of 2021. I talked to a couple of my friends on the European Commission. They are adamant that there will be no more postponement, that May 2021 will be the day that this will go live. And so we have to be ready for May 2021. It's interesting, there's a couple of online surveys done by companies asking them if they felt confident or prepared for May of 2021. And this was just a couple months ago. And only 23%, and then the other survey had 21 or 19, somewhere around there percent, said that the company said they feel confident about their MDR preparations and the May 2021 deadline. So, we have at Nelson Labs worked with some clients that have gotten through the MDRs, have worked with their notified bodies. We have gotten recent feedback. Also, we have close relationships with both TÜV-SÜD and BSI, where we've had discussions with their experts and a lot of their reviewers to kind of get a sense of what they are looking for the new MDR. So we're going to try to share as much of that as possible. Obviously, I can't share everything that we've heard. And so I feel like the questions and answers might be a good place for us to share a lot of information. So please feel free to ask any questions you may have. Now, just to let everyone know, the big impact we're seeing with the May 2021 or just the new MDRs in general has to do more with the new standards that have come out recently. So when you start looking at the impact to industry about gap assessments and trying to get their submissions up to date when their CE mark expires in the next few years, having to put in for the new MDR. These are standards that have recently updated that are now impactful. So these are the ones you have to keep in mind. Specifically, when you start looking at ISO 1093-1, 1093-18, which is a huge impact we'll be talking about a lot. But also, if you are a gas path device, there's also 18562 that has a big impact. So we're going to be kind of molding those together with the MDR and kind of explaining why there's some work that still needs to be done for a lot of devices. So here are the kind of timelines that we saw or that happened in the industry. So May of 2017, the new MDRs were ratified. That's when the 3-year buy-in came in. So they're supposed to be active May 2020, but been postponed to May 2021. But all the devices that are currently on the market, when their CE mark is expired, or if they've been upclassed, so if they, per the MDRs, if they go from like a class 1 to a class 3, or a class 2 to a class 3, then they have to be, at that time, they have to get their CE mark under MDR. So that's kind of what we're looking at. There's a lot of devices that have been submitted already, trying to get, especially the upclassed devices, to get the new CE mark before May 2021 and to beat their expiration dates on their CE mark. Now, some of the things to think about with this MDR, there is no grandfathering provision, and I still get this question all the time. If your device has been on the market in Europe for 15, 20 years, has been no history of clinical history or of unsafe use, it's really well known, that's great. We're very happy for those medical devices and the benefit they are to patients. But that is not a reason to forget about MDR, thinking that your notified body is just going to look at that and go, okay, here's your CE mark now for MDR. There is no grandfathering provision. You can't say that it's been on the market for 15 years and therefore we're safe to use it. So there's also expanded definitions. There are more types of medical devices or devices that are now considered medical devices than before. And the other thing that we're seeing, and this is actually kind of boiled over into the MHRA. So Brexit has impacted, obviously, the MHRA, which is the UK's kind of government body for medical devices. And so they are actually forming their own type of guidance for their mark. They're looking at making their own kind of CE mark. We just actually had a discussion with them a little while ago about this, and one of their big hang-up points is this requirement for a qualified person. And what makes a qualified person? Could that be different for different areas, different notified bodies? The actual requirements for somebody who's responsible for compliance, also for people who make assessments, risk assessments, like biocompatibility. There's going to be different requirements and it's different expectations. Just so you know, the MHRA is actually like leaning towards having someone have a toxicological background in order to make biocompatibility assessments. So not like a QA person or even an engineer, but actually someone who has a toxicological background is possibly going to be required for this. So these are a couple of things just to keep in mind, things that we're starting to get back now from these different notified bodies and different regulatory bodies. Okay, so with it though, one of the big impacts of our customers has been with biocompatibility. In fact, most of the responses we're getting from notified bodies, a lot of the hangups we're getting is with biocompatibility with the MDR. And that's specifically because of the new changes in the standards. A lot of these devices were approved in a regulatory arena in Europe where they did very little biocompatibility. I've been at Nelson now about close to 20 years, and I've been involved with biocompatibility that whole 2 decades. And early in my career for Europe, it was very easy to get a device approved with biocompatibility. You could just claim it was titanium, you could claim it was stainless steel, polypropylene. You maybe did a couple cheap, quick tests, and they were usually approved within the European market. That meant there's a huge gap with medical devices right now for European submissions. And remember, the standards have updated. And one of the things I also get a lot of questions about and talk all the time with notified bodies, which is a lot of these ISO 10993 standards that are new are not consensus standards. So which means that the European bodies have not voted all consensusly to approve or accept the 10993 updates. The truth of that is the consensus program in Europe is pretty broken right now. And the chances of these standards to be consensus standards in the future is pretty low, at least the near future. But a lot of notified bodies are using this, there's a statement in the new MDR talking about state-of-the-art methods. And a lot of them are using that statement to enforce the brand new ISO 10993 or any new standards that are out that are not consensus standards. Now, there's not total agreement with this among the notified bodies. There are a couple notified bodies that are still saying that unless it's a consensus standard, it's not going to be enforced in an MDR. But the majority of them are using that, the statement about having up-to-date methods to be able to utilize the new 10993s. So please discuss with your notified bodies about exactly what standards they're going to be looking at to apply to their MDR. And so a lot of these devices were approved using outdated, limiting tested methods, not to the current state-of-the-art science that we have today. And so that's where the gap analysis has to be done, not just with biocompatibility, that has to go with electrical safety, that has to go with any other endpoints that they're going to be looking at. And once again, examples of patient injuries or tensions were not good enough. So they're looking to improve that. And this knee is a good example. It's made out of cobalt chrome. It's a very hard plastic. It's very easy for all of us to say, look, this knee has been manufactured with known processes, with known materials. It's a safe device. We shouldn't have to worry about its biocompatibility. And there's a lot of truth in those statements. But how we prove that to a notified body is a little bit different now than it was previously. And this is the big impact there. So this is the new chart out of ISO 10993 2018. And one of the big hiccups has to do with the first column that you see right after the contact duration, which is physical and or chemical information. Now, the concept, and I was part of the discussion when we added this column, the discussion here was too many companies were just checkboxing biocompatibility tests. They were just looking at the device's contact and duration, and they were going, okay, I want to do these tests. And that ended up actually having issues because a lot of the brand new devices we're making has more risk to it than these tests can really cover. And so with new materials coming out, new applications, all these new things that we're experiencing with medical devices, this checkbox mentality was causing issues in the public health. And so the discussion within the ISO standard was we need people to understand the materials and processes they're putting into their devices and the safety of those. No longer can you just pick out of a catalog. I mean, we had people who would go to Home Depot and pick out materials there because of the cost savings. I'm not kidding. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with Home Depot materials. They're great for my construction projects, but we need to make sure that they are safe to put into a human, right? And I know a lot about these tests, and I can tell you that I have a high confidence that something from Home Depot, even if it passed this test, means that it's safe. Okay, so these tests are so outdated, to be completely frank, that some of them are still really good and they're good screening tests, but they're not as sensitive as we may think they are or hope they are. They're not a catch-all to everything that could be toxic. So the concept is that you need to do physical and or chemical information gathering exercise to understand the risks of your medical device. It could be you're using well-known materials, and that's great. We want to know that. And that actually helps you evaluate the risks or even having to do with testing based on this. So the good thing about this new standard is based on this physical or chemical information gathering process, it is possible to evaluate these biological endpoints through a risk assessment. For your notified body, especially these animal tests. There are a lot of times that when we do a gap analysis, we have sufficient material information to justify out of some of these test endpoints because of that material, our physical and chemical information gathering exercise. Now, one other thing I want to mention here, which has been a big hot topic in Europe, is there are some disagreements on how that column is interpreted with notified bodies. Some notified bodies interpret this as chemical information only, which means to them that every device has to have chemical information or extractables and leachable testing. That is not correct, and we would ask for you to really push back on that. The concept was that you do your physical information gathering first. And if you don't have sufficient information for the risk, I look at it as a seesaw, right? The more risky your device is, the more information you need to understand the risk. But if I have something that contacts the skin, the risk is lower and the amount of information I need to mitigate that risk is less. So I don't necessarily need to have the sufficient chemistry information for something that's lower risk, but the more risky it is, the more information I should have on those materials and processes to understand the risk of the biocompatibility. So that's the concept for MDR that you need to go through, is you need to understand the physical and chemical information of your materials, and you have to do a report on that. Your notified body is going to want to see that you did a physical and or chemical information gathering and have it in a report with an assessment. Then that pushes what testing you should or shouldn't do based off that initial risk assessment. So this is something that we put into our biological risk assessment evaluation process. And so I'm going to give you a little insight how we do it at Nelson Labs, so you can kind of see how we've done it historically with our clients. And it starts with something called the biological evaluation plan. Now, these BEPs and gap assessments are not unique to Nelson Labs. This term is used throughout the industry now. Our competitors all call it BEPs. Notified bodies will call them BEPs. Even FDA calls them BEPs. But basically, the concept is, this is what is contained in our BEPs. If we were going to write a BEP for you for MDR and a gap analysis, this is what's included in ours. So it gives you a good insight of what you need to have when you submit to your notified body. But it should include the material characterization, that's your suppliers. It's the patient contact, the specification sheets. And I got to tell you, you can get MSDS from your suppliers, but MSDS is not sufficient for this type of gathering information. They're not peer reviewed. A lot of times they're wrong. I should say a lot. That's a little too much, but sometimes they are wrong. But they don't really give the type of information most of the time that the notified body is looking for to help understand the risk of these medical devices. So we need to do a little bit more as far as like, has your supplier done any of their own biocompatibility testing? Do they have any type of master file with the FDA, which is the notified body? If you can get what was done in that from the supplier, then they would utilize those information too. So those are kind of the information we need on the materials. But remember, it's just not about the materials. Most people use the same materials in medical devices. I tested the same stainless steel, I can't tell you how many times. For me, it's more about the processing, what you're doing to those materials that could leave residuals behind. That's where we see most of the problems from a biocompatibility standpoint. Device descriptions and categorization. And I think it's important here to understand that we need to include pictures in these. One of the biggest mistakes I see with companies is that they think that the notified bodies, or in some cases the FDA even, just understand the device as well as they do. And these individuals are looking at multiple submissions over multiple periods of time. And so we really need to give them as much detail about how the device is used, what it looks like as we can, to help them understand our approach from a risk assessment point of view. And we also have to put in there different preparations, how they were tested, risk assessments, chemistry, if we did chemistry and a tox assessment, things like this to help them understand, one, where the gaps were from previous testing that was done, and two, what's the plan to mitigate any further risks. So these are some of the options that we put into these BEPs, and I kind of want to walk through it. So let's just say we have a device that's permanent contact tissue bone. Now let's take that knee we used before, right? So it's a really well-known material and very well-known processing for an orthopedic device. So when we start looking at the required endpoints for evaluation, we first do our risk assessment. That's that material gathering and processing to understand the risk of these medical devices and how they are used. Based on the output of that assessment, so in this case, we're having really well-known materials and really well-known processes, and so we're able to understand the risks really well just from that exercise. So we go through each one of these required endpoints, and we basically talk about why we either feel like we are going to do traditional biocomp tests, or we've done traditional biocomp tests we think apply, or we're going to do evaluation for testing. The first one is cytotoxicity. Hopefully that device has already done cytotox in its history, but if it has not, we probably are just going to have to do cytotox. It's an in vitro test that's relatively inexpensive and quick. So that's one of those we probably just do traditional biocomp tests on. Then when you go to sensitization and irritation, there are two options we can do based off of the use of the materials. So there are times where the company didn't do sensitization or irritation for their original CE mark. When we're doing the gap now, remember, Europe is much more about saving animals and trying not to do unnecessary animal testing. So there are a lot of times we can do written evaluations on addressing risks of sensitization and irritation based off these materials. A good example is this knee we're talking about. We can go through the materials and the processing, look for known sensitizers that are either in the materials or the processing that's used. And if we don't see any materials or processes that are sensitizers, then the risk of sensitization is probably pretty low. And so maybe we could justify out of doing sensitization and still maybe do irritation because one of the residuals could be an irritant. Things along those lines. And yes, that has worked with MDR submissions. For example, material-mediated pyrogenicity, we could do traditional biocomp tests because maybe we don't have a good sense of its pyrogenicity potential. Or this could either be one that we could justify out with chemistry if we find it. These other endpoints in the biocompatibility for this device can all be taken up by chemistry. So if we are performing extractable leachables on this device because we're not super confident about maybe a process residual that we have or maybe a material, we can evaluate all these endpoints with that, or we can address them through doing traditional biocomp tests, or we can look at a written risk assessment. All three options are open to us, and it really just comes to that initial material gathering information. Remember, notified bodies follow the standard more like a law. So the FDA interprets those standards and kind of give their own guidance on how they interpret those standards. And sometimes it can be pretty loose on how they interpret. But the notified body will try to take these ISO standards and really look at them as how they are written and apply them how they are written. And since we evaluate those endpoints in that standard, if we're just looking at testing for MDR, we can do those types of assessments more easily than even the FDA. Implantation, we can either do a written risk assessment or traditional biocomp tests. Implantation cannot be done by chemistry, so that's why that one's separate. The other kind of key to an MDR approach that we've seen be very successful, and I'm sure lots of you are using it, but maybe some of you didn't think about it, which is family groupings. Remember, we want to look at what we're trying to utilize for the MDR as far as endpoints in our submission. So let's take Biocomp because I love it and it's an easy one for me to talk about. If you're looking to fill in gaps for biocompatibility, you should know that biocompatibility is about materials and processing. So if you can find a group of devices that have the same materials, the same processing, then we can group those together to fill in those gaps. And if we have to do some of those tests or evaluations, then we can do those on the worst case component of that grouping and apply it to the rest of them. This is something we do routinely, and it saves some of our customers sometimes millions of dollars, to be completely honest, to have a large portfolio of devices. And so we group those together and get a worst case of the family grouping to do the testing on. So, we can really bring down the number of tests that we have to do or evaluations we have to do by grouping some of these families together. Now, the other one that's giving us a ton of headaches in the MDR has to do about section 10.4. So this has to do with something called CMRs, which stands for carcinogens, mutagens, or reproductive toxins. Now, there's a list of these. You can go to Part 3, the Annex 6 of the regulation. There's also living documents out there that you can pull up that has a list of the CMRs that we are concerned about. But this is something that has caused some problems right now with a lot of our clients. And the best example to this is two of the components on the CMR list are nickel and cobalt. Well, there just happens to be a lot of materials that have nickel and cobalt in them, like stainless steel or cobalt chrome. So what this means in this particular section of the MDR, if you have more than 0.1% by weight of the CMR in your device, you have to label that device as having that CMR. So if you have a lot of stainless steel with a high amount of nickel, and it's more than 0.1% by weight, then you have to label your device as containing nickel. And it doesn't even matter from a safety point of view. So you could do a toxicological information. You can look at your chemistry and say the amount of nickel that leaches off this device is well below any kind of toxicological risk. So why do I have to label my device as having nickel or cobalt or any of the other CMRs like DHP or BPA or any of those? And the reasoning why is because it's more about environmental impact than it is about safety. Because as a toxicologist, 0.1% by weight means nothing to me. If it's an incredibly small device, then it's all about dose. So that 0.1% is going to be probably safe. But if I have a huge device and it's less than 0.1% by weight, but the dose to the patient could be toxic. So as a toxicologist, it's really about the amount that's given to the patient and not the amount by weight that we're concerned about. So this has nothing to do with patient safety. It has to do about environmental impact. These devices get thrown away, and they want to try to understand how much or regulate how much of this is being brought out into the environment. So if you have more than 0.1% by weight of these CMRs, you're going to have to label it. And there are some guidance out there that if this is you're in the case that I can help you with later on what the labels can look like, kind of what some tricks that we've seen on how to label them. But yes, we'll have to label them. There's no way you can get around it, even if you can prove it's not toxic. Now, this just helps let you guys know where some of these chemical things are. So this is our flow chart to help us with the CMR. Now, the best way to get the information about the CMR is to ask your suppliers. And I cannot kind of emphasize this more. There's not much I can do as a lab to really help as far as the total by weight in these a lot of these materials. In some materials, but in most materials, I can't really help more about this 1% by weight. So you have to contact your suppliers and get a statement from your suppliers about the potential of this materials being in your device by 0.1% by weight. If you cannot get that from a supplier, and I would continually push them to try to get that. If you can't get that from them, okay, so what we have to do then is we have to do some kind of chemistry to find out how much of a CMR could be coming off the device. Now remember, in the MDR, it's not about leaching amount, it's about content in the material. And a lot of these materials we can't digest or dissolve and get sensitive enough information. So all we can do is to see if it leaches. And that's what we'll do is we'll try to leach. I mean, if we can do a full digestion, we'll do that. And then we'll look at CMRs to be able to help you. But most materials we can't do that with. So all we can do is look to see if a CMR is in the leachable profile. And if it's not, then we can try to convince the the notified body that if they're in there by more than 0.1% by weight, they should leach at some microscopic level that we should be able to pick up. And the fact that we haven't picked them up tends to imply that they're not in that device. That's worked, but it's been kind of a discussion that we really have to have with the notified body. So by and large, the easiest way to combat this 10.4 section is to get that statement from your supplier and have them do it. Okay, so that's pretty much what I wanted to cover you today. I don't have a whole lot of time to get into a lot. I wanted to leave some time for questions because I think that's more what's going to be beneficial. But I want to let you guys know that we constantly, at us, Nelson Labs, and our sister company, Sterigenics, constantly try to put out educational resources. We get feedback from the FDA on submissions. We try to do a little video about that on wound care, on gas path devices, on all these different things. And you can find these education resources on our websites. We do a bunch of webinars and videos. And once this COVID issue is over, we'll go back to doing on-sites and live seminars and open houses and things like that we'd like to invite you guys to. But at this point, I want to thank you for your time. That's my contact information if you want to reach out to me directly. But at this time, I'll open it up for some questions.
All right, so we have, thanks Thor for that informational presentation. I definitely learned a lot looking at some of those slides, things that I was definitely not aware of. So the first question, we'll jump right in, and there's a question around biocompatibility requirements for primary packaging, the sterile barrier system. Can you touch on that a little bit? Because a lot of what you covered was more device specific.
Yeah, so this is also something we talk a lot about with clients. So the packaging is part of the processing, right? So we still want to consider the impact of the primary packaging in biocompatibility, but we do not recommend you test the packaging because that's not really clinically relevant. How we now you can, I mean, you can do chemistry on so that's what the pharma side does. They do E&L on the packaging to see what could leach into their drug. Obviously, that's a little bit different risk profile, but what most of our clients do and what tends to work the best is if you go through the processing of your medical device and you do sterilization in its final packaging in the form, then any potential leachables, in theory, from your package should be on your device. And so then when we're testing it, we test a finished final device. That includes that sterilization and the contact it's had with its packaging. And I can tell you, I have seen biocompatibility issues from packaging in the past. I've seen inks that have leached onto a device that's caused issues. I've seen some adhesives that have had some problems with volatile compounds. So there is, and this is why pharma does leachables and extractables on their primary packaging, because they obviously have seen we see leachables coming from packaging to the materials. But luckily, our packaging that we use in medical devices has been used for a long time, and so we kind of understand a lot about the safety there. but we should definitely use biocompatibility devices that have its final finished form so that we can answer questions from notified bodies and the FDA about the packaging.
Great, thank you. Another question I have on here is, can you tell us again where we can find the CMR list?
Yeah, so let's go back real fast to here. So this is in the MDR regulation. This is the Annex 6. This is one place. Now, this is obviously a static document, but there are also other within Europe, when you start looking at some of the government bodies there, they'll have living documents there because some of the compounds will come on and off of the CMR list. If you want, I can actually send you, if whoever you are, or whoever out there is interested, if you want to send me an email, I can actually link you the ones we use to update our chemistry list when we do chemistry review, the living list, because this one is a great one at the time, but obviously things change and we want to stay on top of the current list.
Okay. Another question on when is the end of the transition period for the 3 standards discussed today?
So those standards are live today. So there is no transition. Those are the ones, like I said, there are some notified bodies that are still kind of holding on to the fact that they're not consensus standards. But for the vast majority of our notified bodies we work with and have submitted to, and the FDA, those standards are applied right now. So any testing you do, you should do it to the brand new 10993 standards.
Okay, great. Another question I've gotten is, do you have any techniques for working with suppliers to get those material lists? Some people have had a lot of trouble getting those lists, and that creates a lot of headaches. So any success stories or things that you can relay that might help some of the people on our webinar to do that?
Yeah, so we've done a couple of tricks with that. So first off, I always tell people that you probably can get that information easier when you're working on a contract with them up front. I know that you probably have already established a relationship, but if you're looking at suppliers going forward in your discussions, when they want your business, they're usually more willing to give you information than when they already have your business. So that's one tip. But the other one is if it has to do with, there's a couple of reasons why they won't give it to you. The one that's the hardest to overcome is if it's a big plastic company and they supply plastic to automobiles and to planes, and the medical device industry is so small that they just don't worry about, the impact if they lose that business. That's a little harder. So that's the one we tend to have to go the chemistry route. But in some cases, they don't want to give up any type of formulation information to you, or they consider IP. In that case, we can actually do it for you. So for some reason, they don't think us as labs can replicate their plastics, which is probably true. I wouldn't even know when to begin. So we can work with them with an NDA independently of you. We can get the formulation, and then we've been able to make a statement with the notified bodies saying we've reviewed it, and that we can make that statement on behalf of the company. And if the notified body needs to see it, that we can provide it to them and not have it used. So it depends on why they're refusing to work with you. But those are some of the things we've done in the past to get that information.
Great, great. And then one other kind of more business focused question. What do you think the impact of the CMR list and the labeling requirements will have on sales of devices with those materials?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'll just give you my thoughts. Obviously, this is not based on any knowledge that I have, but I think there could be a business impact, and the reason why is because we saw a similar thing here in the United States with plasticizers and water bottles. When the threat of carcinogens come out with plasticizers, and all of a sudden the public just said, okay, we can't have any plasticizers in our plastic. We're gonna have to have DHP, BPA free, and we don't even want to think about it. Obviously, suppliers you don't want to talk about the dose level, about how much can we be exposed per day to keep under a risk. There's really published literature out there. We know a lot about those plasticizers from a toxicological point of view. but there's no discussion of the public about that. It's oh, we're going to have it, we're going to die, right? And so I do think that there's a chance that some of these plasticizers that do carry a bad name to them, specifically the CMRs, specifically the plasticizers, could have an impact in Europe if you have to label it that. I could definitely see some financial impact or preference over similar competitor devices that do not have those labels. I would hope that nickel and cobalt and things wouldn't have the same impact, but you wouldn't know. And so that's one of the things that I've kind of pushed back on the European Union or the European Commission a little bit. My colleagues that I know that work in there, so I understand why they put this in there, but the impact to labeling, impact to the testing and trying to understand this has really been a big headache for us and our customers. And so trying to help them understand the impact over the benefit, because like I said, from a toxicological standpoint, it makes no sense because it doesn't mean anything to the safety of the patient or even the users of the device. It all has to do with the environmental impact of discarding these. And I understand that, but at the same time, the benefit versus pain in the butt ratio there is hard for me to understand. So I know that's a long answer that didn't really answer anything, but that's just my thoughts on what I've seen and some of the things that could be impactful.
I definitely appreciate your thoughts on that. It was kind of a loaded question, but you got to throw a few in there.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah, you do. Okay, so that's all the questions I have on the panel. So I want to say a big thank you to Thor for sharing his thoughts on MDR and Nelson Labs. So right now I'm just going to wrap up the summit because this is our last session. Believe it or not, those 2 days went really, really fast. So again, this is our final session of the 2021 State of Medical Device Virtual Summit. We had over 4,000 people register for the event, so that's pretty impressive, and we hope you found it valuable. We'll join us next time. So all the session recordings and slides will be available shortly on the Virtual Summit website. You'll also be receiving an email to share some feedback on the event. We'd really love to hear your thoughts on it, which sessions you loved, which sessions didn't love as much, but we want to make events like this better in the future. Again, thank you so much for joining us. And with that, we're going to wrap up, and I hope you all have a happy, healthy, and safe new year. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.